Okay, so today I'm going to show you how are we going to code a login process. Okay, so uh, we have here our previous diagram in which I showed you how the API and or front end or Flutter works. Okay, so how are we going to go through with our login process? So from our web or mobile, okay, so we are going to send the username and password. Okay, so we are going to use here the HTTP package with the get method. Okay, since we are just going to send, we're not going to do anything on the records. We're just going to retrieve records if there are any. Okay, so we have here username and password. Then it is going to be processed by login.php. So the API endpoint that we're going to have is actually login.php. Okay, so once login.php receives our username and password, it is then going to create a connection with our database. Our database, by the way, we have DB contacts, because in the series we are going to have our contacts database wherein a user can enter or create contacts and into this database. Okay, so we have here, particularly in our login process, since the user is going to log in, so we have there our TBL users. Okay, so once it created the connection to our database, it is going to create a query or make a query on a TBL users based on the username and password passed into our API. Then the database then is going to return if there are records that have been qualified based on the constraint for the username and password. It is going to pass it back to our API, and consequently our API is going to pass it to our client. Okay, so basically that would be our the procedure. From here, it is going to pass username and password, then process by the login.php, make a connection, create a query, then it is going to return either there is a record or an empty set, empty list if ever there are no records that match the username and password. Okay, so we have here our the structure of the TBL users. Okay, so we have the ID, which is actually the auto increment. This is our foreign keys to other tables. Then we have username, password, and the full name. Okay, and I have here some records. So we have Pitok for the username, 12345 the password, and the full name is we have Pitok Batulata, and so on. Okay, so this is the table that we are going to query. Okay, and by the way, the name is we have DB contacts. Okay, so let's go first with our API. Okay, so we have here, I created here a connection routine. I name it connection-pdo.php because we are going to use here PHP data objects, or the PDO. Okay, so on the first line here, so this is just a review for those of you who already have background on PHP. So we have here, we have identified the username for our local host. Then we have root or the default username, password would be blank, and the database name is DB contacts, as I have shown you in our browser. Then we created here the connection with the object, connection object. We have here con. Okay, so this line here is going to create the connection, and if ever there will be an error, then it is just going to send this one here. But if ever there are no errors, then we are going to proceed here. Okay, so first is we are going to include the connection file. Okay, so line number 5, this creates the connection to our database. Okay, so next is we are going to get the username and password passed by the client. In our case, Flutter. Okay, so take note, the username and password comes from Flutter. Okay, so since it is going to use an HTTP GET, so therefore we're going to have the super global GET in our method here. Okay, so we have now the data for the username and password. So next is we are going to create our query. So for our query here is we have select asterisk from TBL users, where username is equal to placeholder. Okay, so we have some placeholders here, and we are going to define it later on. Okay, so the technique here actually, if we have a valid username and password, is just to get a query, or retrieve all fields now from this table with the constraint this username and password. Okay, then we are going to create our prepared statement object. So we have here our statement with our SQL here. Okay, then we are going to bind our parameters. So we need to bind our parameters. As you can see here, we have our placeholders. Okay, username, and we are going to assign the username that we get from line number 7, and so with our password. Okay, so after that, then we have execute. So this is not the line that is going to execute the query against our database. Okay, then we are going to fetch. Okay, so we are going to get if there are records that match or that passed our constraint, and if there are, and we are actually expecting here it could only be 0 or 1 record. Okay, so we have here our return value, fetch all. Okay, by the way, fetch assoc means it is going to return an associative array. Okay, so I think I have mentioned about associative array with our previous video, so you already know what is an associative array. Okay, again, this is going to return a list. Okay, a result set in the form of a list, and it could either be only 1 or 0 records. Then last is we are going to echo, or we are going to return now the return value, and as you can see here, we have JSON encode. Okay, so JSON encode means it is going to encode, is going to create, okay, or convert this array. Take note, this is an array. As a result set, it is an array, but since we are going to use the echo here to return the result, it is going to convert this array into a JSON string. Okay, so the possible output here could only be an empty list or a list of map. Okay, a single record. Okay, so I'm going to save this one here. So we are done with our API. Okay, so next is we are going to have our code in Flutter. Okay, so I have created here a very simple interface. So we have here 2 text fields, username and the password. Then once the user is going to click on login, it is going to contact our API and submit these 2 values here. Okay, and that would then be the data that is going to be processed by our API. So our target with our Flutter is to generate data for the username and password, and later on also code to receive and process the return value here. Okay, so I have here Okay, so we have here text field number 1, so we have username controller. Okay, and text field number 2, so we have password controller. And still we have the message because as of now I'm just going to display here if ever the login is successful or not. Okay, so we have here our the text field, another text field. By the way, obscure text is for the password. Okay, then login for the button, and still, as I've said, we have here the text for the message below. Okay, if it's successful or not. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to create here void a function that is going to process our login. And since we are going to contact a database, so therefore we're going to have an asynchronous function. Okay, so the very first thing that we're going to do here is we are going to define our URL. Okay, from our local host, we're going to go back to our local host. Then we have Flutter /API /login.php. Okay, then after that we are also going to since we are going to send the username and password as our parameter, so therefore we are going to create here a map of string dynamic. We are just going to call it query parameters. Query params is equal to. Okay, so for our query parameters, since we are required based on our API, we need to submit username and password. Okay, so therefore we are going to have here username and password. Okay, so these are the parameters, the parameter names that we are going to submit. But what would then be our value here? So since we, as I've said, we are going to use our username controller for the username, and we're going to have also our password controller for our password. Okay, so here we have created our query parameters. Okay, so next is we are going to use this parameter by using our HTTP package. But before that, I'm going to use here a try catch block. Okay, so in our try catch, so first is trying to create our response is equal to since we are going to contact a database, so therefore it is an asynchronous procedure, so therefore we are going to have here an await function. Okay, await, then http that get, so we're going to use our get, then we are going to parse our URL. Okay, then we are going to incorporate our parameters, so that replace, then we are going to have query parameters, which is the one that we have defined above, so we have query params. Okay, so what should be, by the way, undefined name, so we must have to declare it here. So the data type for this one is http that response. Okay, so this line here is the one responsible in sending this data into our API. Okay, so the next thing that we're going to do now is we are going to once await Take note, we could only proceed to line number 112 or 112 once once this line here has been finished executing. Okay, when it is going to finish, when the API returns something. Okay, so that's the only time that we're going to proceed to the next line, and that is being done by await. Okay, so we are going to validate now if response that status code is equal to 200. Okay, so meaning successful. Okay. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to have, okay, I'm just going to call it user is equal to response that body. But take note that response at body is actually a string, so therefore we could not use our associative array. This is not yet an array. Okay, it's still a string, so that it is going to be converted or parsed or converted into an array. So we are going to use, just like with our previous video, we are going to have JSON decode response that body. Okay. Now I just want you to take note. I just want to emphasize here that the return value is a list. Okay. Return type is actually a list of maps. Okay. So why is it a list of maps? That is actually here. Fetch all is going to return actually a list. Okay. Now we could have also here, if ever that we want to return only a map, we could have fetch. But there is actually a problem. There is a catch here with fetch only, because if ever we are going to have an invalid login, it is going to return, supposedly it is going to return an empty map. But with PDO, it is going to return false. Okay, so therefore our return value then is inconsistent when it comes to its data type. If ever it is a valid password, valid login, it is going to return a list of map. No, if fetch only, it is going to return a map. But if ever it is an invalid login, it is going to return a Boolean data type. Okay, so therefore I'm not going to recommend now that we're going to use the fetch. We are just going to have fetch all, because it is going to return, it could either be a list of single map or an empty list. So therefore the data type would be consistent. Okay, so we're going to use here fetch all. Okay, so next. Okay, so what I'm going to do here first is I'm just going to print so that we could see actually the output. Okay, I'm just going to print response that body. Okay, so we're going to deal with this with the display on our UI later on. Then else, then I'm going to have print invalid username or password. Okay. No. Actually, we have a problem here. Let us just make it this way first. Okay. So I just want to show you what is actually the format of the response object. Okay. So reload. Okay, so we're going to have ptok and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we could see here the return value. So login. Oh, we have a problem. We must have to call the login method. Okay, save and reload. One, two, three, four, five. Okay. So you could see here now. It is a list. Why? Because as you can see, we have this one here. Okay, square brackets, square braces, and inside is we have a map which contains our user details. Okay, so that's why I have written here that the return type is a list of map, a single map. We're expecting here a single map. Okay, and then if ever we're going to have an invalid one, so I'm going to have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So you must see here an empty list. Login. So we could see here now an empty list. Okay. So therefore, if ever it is empty, so therefore it is invalid. Okay. So this message here is actually not for the invalid password, but it has something, an error from our this one here, from our status code. Okay. But anyway, what I want you to take note is this one. If ever invalid, an empty list. If ever valid, it is not empty. So therefore here, after we have we have extracted response.body and also converted it into a list. So the next thing that we're going to do here is we're going to validate if it is valid. So how would we know it is not empty? Okay, so if user that we have here the method or property is not empty. Okay, so if it is not empty, so therefore valid. If ever empty, else. Okay, I'm just going to have set state, then we're going to have our message is equal to invalid username or password. Okay, but if ever valid, okay, I'm just going to display set state, then I'm just going to display in the message okay, I'm just going to have the response.body first. Okay, then here I'm just going to have the status code. Okay, okay, going back. So first we send our query, then as soon as we receive the response from the API, we have converted the response.body into a list. Okay, we have decoded it, so it is now an array. Then we're validated here. How to validate if it is a valid login? So we have here if it is not empty. Okay, so if it is not empty, what I did here is only just to display the response. Okay, the whole, we would expect that we are going to get this one here. Okay, but if ever it is empty, so therefore we're going to have invalid username or password. Okay, so save, then reload. Pitok 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Login. Okay, so valid. As you could see here, we have now our the whole body for the response. But if ever we have okay, invalid password, wrong password, login, so we have invalid username or password. Okay, so we have it here. Now, what I want is that if ever valid password, it is going to display here the full name. Okay, so we have here the full name. I want to display that. Okay, so therefore our message should be user then usr underscore full name. We have here. Okay, let's try. Reload. It took 1, 2, 3, 5. Oops. Oh, actually we have an error here. By the way, with our catch, okay, I'm just going to display. Okay, I'm just going to set state. Message is equal to there was actually an error. Okay, so I'm just going to show you the error. Okay, so we have ptok 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 login. So we have here the error. Okay, expected a value of type in but got one of type string. Okay, so I want you to take note that the content of the list is actually a map. Okay, so it has a single element. Okay, and if ever we're dealing with a list, if ever that we get the elements from a list, is we are going to have, take note of the error, it is expecting for an integer, but we get a string. So here, it expects for an integer, but it gets a string. Why? It is because, how are we going to get, by the way, the first element? So we're going to have, this is an element 0, okay, element 1, and so on. So we are very sure that it could either be only one or empty elements. Okay, so therefore, if ever it is not empty, so we are sure that it has only a single element. So therefore, we are going to get the first element only. Okay, so therefore, we are going to get this one here, the first element, but specifically, it is the full name. So the first element with only the full name. Okay, so let us try again. Reload. Then log in. So we have here now our name. Okay, how about we have Kulas? Then 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So we have Kulas. If ever invalid password, so we have invalid username or password. Okay, so this is now the most basic manipulation for our database. Okay, so in our next videos we're going to have some more, and we are then going to have on how are we going to insert, update, and delete, and also retrieve multiple records. Okay, so that's all for this video, and I'll see you on the next topic.